Welcome to the Introduction to B3 training. In this introductory video, we will describe the role and facets of Minnesota's Buildings, Benchmarks, and Beyond, or B3 program. We will walk through aspects of the B3 program, including the B3 Guidelines, a set of performance requirements for projects receiving general obligation bond funding from the state of Minnesota, the SB 2030 Energy Standard, a progressive energy and carbon reduction standard within the B3 Guidelines, and how to begin the process of pursuing a B3 project. The State of Minnesota's Buildings, Benchmarks, and Beyond program, also known as B3, sets standards for new and existing buildings in Minnesota. The resources provided by B3 allow for buildings to achieve holistic sustainability and wellness outcomes in building design, construction, and operations. The B3 program contains several distinct programs and tools. These include the B3 Guidelines, a set of required performance strategies for state-funded projects, the SB 2030 Energy Standard, a progressive energy and carbon reduction program, B3 Benchmarking, a tool for tracking and identifying improvement areas in monthly and annual energy usage, Energy Efficient Operations, a tool for documenting diagnostic checks of energy-consuming devices, and Post-Occupancy Evaluation, a program for tracking indoor environmental quality through occupant surveys. The B3 suite of programs aims to support sustainable buildings throughout their life cycle, from pre-design to post-operations. During pre-design, the program helps establish project-specific performance requirements. During the design and construction phases, the program supports implementation of sustainable design strategies to meet project goals. Post-occupancy, the program tracks actual building performance, identifying and improving performance gaps. More information about the B3 program can be found on the B3 website, www.b3mn.org. Now, let's dig deeper into one program within B3, the B3 Guidelines. The B3 Guidelines were established in 2004 to meet Minnesota's need for state-funded buildings to achieve sustainability goals. They are periodically updated to account for changes in design and construction practices, as well as the availability of new tools and resources. To learn more about the B3 Guidelines, visit the URL shown here at b3mn.org/guidelines. The B3 Guidelines are a set of required performance strategies for projects that receive general obligation bond funding from the state of Minnesota. They may apply to the design and construction of new buildings or major renovations. The B3 Guidelines can also be pursued voluntarily or to achieve other sustainable building requirements, such as city policies. However, any B3 Guidelines project not receiving state funding will be required to pay a fee. To learn more about the fees required for these projects, visit the B3 Guidelines and SB 2030 fee table, linked here. There are 5 categories of strategies within the B3 Guidelines. Performance management, which sets up processes to set and meet sustainability goals. Site and water, which helps project teams support healthy soils, vegetation, animal habitat, and water cycles. Energy and atmosphere, which helps decrease building energy use through strategies like energy efficiency and renewable energy. Indoor environmental quality, which improves building user experience through strategies like daylighting and acoustics. And materials and waste, which helps project teams reduce waste throughout the building's life cycle. Within a project team pursuing the B3 Guidelines, there are several roles that contribute to project success. These include the agency contact, a representative from the state that reviews and approves project submissions. The guideline leader, the project team member responsible for managing the project's submission to the B3 Guidelines. And other team members that assist with compliance documentation, such as the architectural leader, energy leader, and more. On-demand training and guidance documents are available for the guideline leader, agency contact, and team member roles on the B3 Guidelines Training and Education webpage at the URL shown here. Compliance with the B3 Guidelines is documented within the B3 Guidelines Tracking Tool. This tool is an online project file where project teams will submit compliance documentation at each project phase, from pre-design through closeout. Information shown within the tracking tool includes project progress, specific guideline requirements, assignments for each team member, and guideline inputs. To learn more about using the B3 Guidelines Tracking Tool, view the On-Demand Tracking Tool navigation training available on the B3 Guidelines Training and Education webpage at the URL shown here. Now, let's explore another component of the B3 program, the SB 2030 Energy Standard. SB 2030 is modeled after the National Architecture 2030 effort, with customizations to better fit Minnesota's sustainable building needs. More information about the SB 2030 Energy Standard can be found at the URL shown here at b3mn.org/2030 Energy Standard. Sustainable Buildings 2030, or the SB 2030 Energy Standard, provides a sustainable buildings program reflective of Minnesota's buildings, climate, and policies. SB 2030 may apply to the design and construction of new buildings and major renovations. For special SB 2030 circumstances, the Small Buildings Method and Wastewater Treatment Facilities SB 2030 pathways are available. SB 2030 aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage within the built environment, using a progressive energy and carbon reduction program. More details about the reductions required by SB 2030 will be described shortly. SB 2030 is a part of the Energy and Atmosphere category of the B3 Guidelines, so all projects pursuing the B3 Guidelines must also meet SB 2030. The energy consumption reduction required by SB 2030 depends on the project's start date. Over time, SB 2030 has required greater and greater reductions in the building energy consumption of projects when compared to a 2003 average building baseline. Projects starting schematic design after January 1, 2025 must reduce their net energy consumption by 90%. Although SB 2030 is a part of the B3 Guidelines, some non-state funded projects may be only required to meet SB 2030 as a standalone program. For example, SB 2030 may be required by a city's sustainable building policy, triggered by financial incentives or approval of a planned unit development. The SB 2030 Energy Standard can also be pursued voluntarily. Like the B3 Guidelines, any SB 2030 project not receiving state funding will be required to pay a fee. To learn more about the fees required for these projects, visit the B3 Guidelines and SB 2030 fee table linked here. Like the B3 Guidelines, SB 2030 program requirements span across project phases. During pre-design, project teams calculate their SB 2030 Energy Standard using the SB 2030 Energy Standard tool. This establishes an energy budget for the project. As the project is being designed, project teams optimize the building's energy usage using strategies like energy efficiency and renewable energy. Project teams will also conduct energy modeling to ensure their projects will meet their SB 2030 Energy Standard. Also during the design phase, projects undergo a third-party review to ensure the rigorous standards of SB 2030 are met. As the project gets built, project teams implement construction practices that meet performance requirements. And once the project is complete, the building owner tracks annual energy use to ensure the project meets its performance requirements in operations. SB 2030 utilizes the SB 2030 Energy Standard tool, which calculates the project's specific energy standard. This tool is accessible online through the B3 Guidelines Tracking tool, located within the B3 Guidelines Energy and Atmosphere category. To use the Energy Standard tool, project teams input elements like building type and total area. The Energy Standard tool uses these inputs to calculate an energy use intensity, or EUI standard. Let's discuss the hierarchy of options for achieving energy and carbon reduction goals for B3 projects. This hierarchy includes energy efficiency and on-site renewables, in-portfolio renewables, and renewable energy certificates, or RECs. Projects that demonstrate they cannot fully meet their SB 2030 standard with cost-effective measures in the top tier of this hierarchy may keep moving through it, in the order shown, until they finally meet their standard. Energy efficiency includes strategies such as daylighting, insulation, and passive solar heating. Energy efficiency measures used in SB 2030 buildings typically go beyond those required by the Energy Code. On-site or on-campus renewables include renewable energy generation, such as photovoltaic systems or wind turbines, within the building footprint, building site, and/or project campus. In-portfolio renewables include renewable energy sources available off-site, within the building owner's portfolio of sites. RECs include renewable energy certificates from a qualifying off-site source. Another tool used by B3 projects is B3 benchmarking, where after construction of a B3 Guidelines or SB 2030 project occurs, projects must track their building performance for 10 years of operations. Metrics like energy and water usage are tracked within the B3 benchmarking tool, then reviewed and approved in the occupancy mode of the B3 Guidelines tracking tool. While projects must document this data for 10 years to comply with the B3 Guidelines, the intent of the B3 benchmarking tool is to help users improve their energy and water usage indefinitely. The B3 benchmarking tool is used by public buildings across Minnesota to manage and improve their energy and water efficiency. To foster this efficiency, some of the functions of the tool include diagnostic identification of areas for improvement, usage ranking among peers, and tracking and storing the project's building performance over time. Next, let's discuss how project teams can begin pursuing the B3 program. Project setup is initiated by filling out the appropriate project intake form on the B3 website. This should be done as soon as possible when the project expects they will be required to meet the B3 Guidelines or SB 2030 Energy Standard. Project setup can be initiated by the building owner or developer, or another member of the project team, such as the guideline leader. The form required will depend on whether the project is state-funded or fee-applied. When filling out the project intake form, the project team will appropriately report the expected size and scope of their project. This will inform which guidelines appear within the B3 Guidelines tracking tool. For example, a project with no educational spaces would not display guidelines specifically for educational spaces within the tracking tool. If a project team is unsure of their project's exact scope, potentially relevant guidelines will be included until confirmed otherwise. Project intake forms can be located on the B3 Guidelines page under the Begin the Process heading at the URL shown here. Once the form is submitted, the B3 administrators will establish the project file within the B3 Guidelines tracking tool. Once this file is available for use, the guideline leader will receive a welcome email with their login information. To learn how other projects have used the B3 programs and tools, project teams can visit the Case Studies database. The Case Studies database serves as a record of the design and performance information including compliance status for constructed projects that use the B3 guidelines or SB 2030 Energy Standard. To visit the case studies database, go to the URL shown here at casestudies.b3mn.org. Any questions about the B3 programs and tools can be directed to the B3 Guidelines administrators at the email shown. This concludes the Introduction to B3 training, where we have covered 2 programs within B3, the B3 Guidelines and SB 2030 Energy Standard. To learn more about the B3 programs and tools, please visit our website or contact the B3 program administrators. Thank you.